to another edition of the Platformer Chronicles. Today we are going to be discussing the most controversial video game mascots of all time. Both mascots that wielded guns in the face of controversy. A shocking premise. A cartoon character with a pistol, with a gun, let alone a loaded gun. But it has happened twice, or maybe 3 or 4 times. But our journey begins with the mascot for EA Games back in the early 90s, James Pond. Obviously, it's a pun on James Bond. Mr. James Pond had a trilogy of games, and he's one of those characters that is pretty damn cool, but really never got to take off and become a superstar, unlike his counterpart, James Bond, of course. You could argue that James Pond is the original parody of James Bond as a platformer character before Gex took the reins later on during the late 1990s. On the original cover and art for the character of James Pond, he is holding a gun. Quite shocking, despite the fact that I think most people back in the 90s really didn't give a damn. But that's because the character of James Pond wasn't popular. Maybe they decided to give him a gun on the art to make him popular? Who knows? I think it's very cool myself. If you've ever played any of the old James Pond games, he never actually uses his gun. But all the official artwork for the character of James Pond, he always has a gun in his hand, at least for the most part. I just found a connection between James Pond and the Sonic the Hedgehog character, Shadow the Hedgehog. His 2005 video game was a little bit controversial at the time, as it was a Sonic character that used guns in the game, and people talked about it a lot, and I actually really like this game. I think it's a good game. I think it gets a bad rap. It's definitely not as bad as people say it is, although it has really annoying things about it, and it is hard as hell. Despite its flaws, I think it's one of the best Sonic games before Sonic's downfall in the late 2000s. You could consider it the last gasp, really, of like the great era of Sonic, the GameCube era. I just found it interesting when I started thinking about characters with guns. Shadow had one, and so did James Pond. Did Sega get the idea to give Shadow a gun from James Pond? No. Yeah, right. James Pond was not a popular video game mascot, but it would have been cool if he was. I played the first 2 James Pond games, and they're pretty decent, but they're not what you expect them to be. Which is interesting. Not every platformer should be the same traditional thing. Then I played James Pond 3, and I can tell right away that they were trying to really make this game a lot better than the first 2. And I thought it was really interesting. There's like gravity, stuff with the gravity and the gameplay, and I liked it. Graphically, it's much of an improvement over the first 2 titles. It's just interesting to see how history repeats itself. From James Pond to Shadow. The big question here is, would it be more controversial today if they put guns in Sonic again, or less controversial? The same can be said for James Pond. If James Pond, returned and still had a pistol and actually used it in the games, would it spark more controversy or less? It's a very fascinating question about our culture. Guns in video games. And it's even on some of the coolest cartoon characters of platformer mascots in the history of video games. Let me know what you guys think in the comments section below. This is another episode of the Platformer Chronicles. Thank you for watching.